Hey there guys, Gamer Dude back once again. With us nearing the end of our Spidey countdown, with it only being out in just one day, I do have one last video to share with you tomorrow night, so stay tuned for that. It's going to be a real treat for you all. So shout out to all my subscribers. I want to thank you all so much. I really do appreciate the support and likes and comments with this series that I've been doing. Really do appreciate it. Shout out to Blazon, 710420, Direct Virus, Monty Burns Wakey, the AOB. They're my main shout outs for today. So straight to business with this video. Unless you have any radioactive spiders or super soldier serums lying around, the closest that we will ever get to our childhood dreams of becoming a superhero is the comfort of a controller. Unless you happen to get bitten by a radioactive goat or something and become the amazing Goat Man. I don't know. Just saying. I'm just saying. So superheroes are constantly evolving from the MCU to the DCU. That's the DC universe, by the way, which, if you don't follow, is kind of weird. But moving on. With every Spidey game that he stars in, it's basically a snapshot of whatever sort of comic book or big-time movie that defined that era. So we had the sort of Sam Raimi style side of things with the three franchise movies in the three franchise game. From the Atari 2600 to the PS4, the web slinger has graced us on many consoles and arcade cabinets. In 1982, the famed Atari 2600 graced us with the Amazing Spider-Man. That was it. It was just the Amazing Spider-Man. Real originality for a name there. This wasn't only the first ever Spider-Man game in the saga, it was actually the first ever Marvel game in general, which is kind of a big deal, right? It really kicked off Marvel's never-dying legacy that's going to lead us to Insomniac's Spider-Man saga, which we're all super hyped for. Come on. I don't know a single person who isn't hyped for this. So 2 years after the Atari 2600 adventure, Spidey would appear on early PC. I will include pictures for these, by the way. In 1984, a bloke named Scott Adams, I think he was in lead with Marvel and the games of the time, like who decided to go where with the games, I don't know. I only did a bit of research. Anyway, he planned to start a new series of text adventure games, so basically recreating the game Adventure, just without falling through some ice for a key. If you don't get that reference, I fear for you. I really do. So these games were intended to include a variety of Marvel characters, where you basically click, go here. This ring a bell, anybody? Two more Spider-Man games were released in this sort of puzzle style game thing that they had going on at the time. On the Amiga, which had you chasing Mysterio through rooms, sort of like Mario chasing a mushroom princess through a castle. Yeah. Anyway, then we had one of the more popular games of the era. It was Spider-Man and Captain America in Doctor Doom's Revenge. So, is it just me, or did games and things back then always have to include revenge? It was a trending thing, even with cartoons. It was like revenge. Anyway, moving on, guys. So in spite of the success of the previous games, Spidey didn't really appear again or get that much popular in the 16-bit era. It was on a bit of a cool down until the next sort of era of games. So his first appearance since then wasn't really a true Spider-Man appearance. It was sort of just a cameo in a game that wasn't even related to Marvel at all in any way, shape or form. But this was before all the copyrights and all the rights were sold off, so we can deal with that, we can settle with it. The game itself was actually called... trying to remember this now. It was called Revenge of Shinob, or Shinobi. Shinobi? Am I pronouncing that right? I really don't know. It was Japanese. The Japanese games are so hard to pronounce. Like Ghost of Toshima. Is it Toshima or Toshima? I don't know. Anyway, at the time, Sega actually had the rights to Spider-Man. And Sega were doing pretty well for themselves at the time. They'd released several other Spider-Man titles, of which I didn't bother to pick the names out of. Yeah, I didn't want to include that in this video, so just forget I said that. Rewind. So speaking of, anyway, if you were lucky enough to actually have the Sega Genesis, you probably owned or played Spider-Man vs. the Kingpin, which was sort of an early take on the animated series, which I'm going to go into detail later on in this video as well. It showed us sort of the first real rendition of Peter Parker and Spider-Man's mashup life that we'd actually seen, even from the comic books. This game covered it a lot. You could chill in Spider-Man's apartment to refill his health. You could take photos for the Daily Bugle to earn money for his web fluid. It was actually really cool. Unfortunately, I no longer have an Atari system, so I couldn't feature that video in this countdown. But it's well worth a watch if you're into that sort of old retro gaming. Where was I? This game actually also featured Venom's first ever on-screen appearance, as well as his first game appearance. It was a really big deal for Sega at the time. So Sega continued this up until 1991 with a game, well, once again called Spider-Man. They're really getting original with these names, aren't they? They're just calling them Spider-Man. At least the new one went with Marvel Spider-Man. You know? This was sort of a kind of early take on the Mortal Kombat Tekken sort of style of fighting, which I don't have a problem with. I like that sort of game. I mean, I'm a fan of the Injustice games. I always play the Injustice games, and it was very early take on that sort of thing. Just remove the 4K graphics, remove the digital enhancements, and remove all the upgrades and extra armor. And anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Spidey then moved on and started showing up and sticking to whatever platform company would have him. Which makes sense, because at the time Sega were concentrating on other games. They just brought out the Mega Drive, so they were really concentrating on platform games for that. In 1990, Nintendo actually took the rights to Spider-Man. They took it to the portable side, so it was on the original Game Boy, not the handheld portable one. It was sort of like a big iPad-looking thing, and it was like swipe. All the games you swiped. Basically, you just swiped across the screen and fought the enemies like that. They did 3 games for this, and the last one in the series was actually colour. It was in colour. And that was the end of that sort of Game Boy series before they brought out the Game Boy Color and the other handheld Game Boys and whatnot. Sadly, the next 2 games in the series, as I just said, they failed. So Spidey swung off again, which came in the form of Spider-Man and the X-Men in Arcade's Revenge. This was actually based on a comic book from about 30 years earlier. And it was a really good game. To actually put it in perspective in this video, I did watch a trailer for it. And it's surprising that it was actually really good. The cutscenes weren't actually that bad. They were drawn and animated by one of the actual comic artists at the time. So credit where it's due for that. But anyway, this was a simpler time before all the rights would be sold off after Marvel's bankruptcy, but that's a story for another day. It was where he could team up with anyone that the developers of the games really wanted him to. So he could Avengers, X-Men, anything you can think of in the Marvel universe, really. He could team up with them because there was no dispute on, oh, we own this, we own that, this is ours, this is theirs, you know, that sort of thing. There's no lawsuits and whatnot back then. Well, at least not as bad as there are today. Anyway, moving on. For the lead up to the 3D universe, it wasn't actually until the early 90s, because it was a very strange time for Spider-Man. James Cameron's planned movie, well, went belly up, and then we all saw what he made as his feature film. Da, 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 da. Ah! Yeah. The sinking ship must have been a reference to the sinking ship of the Spider-Man film he was trying to make. Epiphany. So after that, the comics, it was the comics that were taking over. It was the X-Men that were taking over in the comic universe, because Spider-Man went a bit dead in the comic world as well. I'm not sure as to why, because documents were either lost or moved on to Disney. That I don't know. I don't know how that worked out. But it wasn't until the debut of Venom in the critically acclaimed Spider-Man the Animated Series in 1994, which actually injected some sort of backstory into Spider-Man and Peter Parker. You actually felt like you were a part of them. How this one guy in college was struggling between two lives. He was also struggling between his superhero love life and his normal love life. So that was Spidey and Black Cat, and then Parker and Mary Jane, or Parker and whoever girl happened to come along at the time when Mary Jane wasn't there. But still, it was actually one of the best animated series to date. It was one of the best Spider-Man adaptations on TV, in my opinion. So that really did inject some life back into Spider-Man. And it brought sort of a saga of comics as well, which featured Carnage, as well as the games, which featured you playing as Spidey and Venom in sort of a run around New York, Tekken-style fight scene again. You were jumping from buildings, fighting enemies, that sort of stuff. It was all the same for the older 16-bit games back then, because they didn't have the money to develop newer engines. They had to keep replacing engines that they'd used before and just updating certain scenes and bits of text, because it was cheaper and a lot easier. It was, as I said, it was a classic brawler game, and with the introduction of Spider-Man the Animated Series, we'll feature a picture, in 1994, which was, again, by far the best adaptation. As I've said, it was just beautiful. And if you haven't seen it, I do recommend it. It should just come under Spider-Man the Animated Series. It was absolutely flawless. It was basically... it brought on a brand new franchise of games. Brought in some new inspiration for creators of the comic books as well. So it did bring on another game, which was based on a 2D platform. Unfortunately, this was before the PS1 released in 1998, sorry. And this game was sort of, it was another sort of fighting style one, but the graphics and gameplay were inspired by the animated series. The cutscenes were actually, so it felt like you were watching an episode of the animated series because that's where they were taken from. Whether they drew up new scenes for that game or just used previous scenes from the animated series itself, I don't know. It wasn't until the year 2000 that we actually saw a new chapter in Spider-Man gaming. After a 4-year gap and the animated series being cancelled in 1998, unfortunately, on that huge annoying cliffhanger where we don't know if he finds Mary Jane. Still really quite annoyed at that cliffhanger. And the developer of the series said he thought he ended it well. Anyway, after this, in the year 2000, Neversoft released a game based on that series. I think it was set a few years after with a couple of differences and changes. And it was developed by Neversoft, and it is most definitely one of my most favourite Spider-Man games to date. I have to say that if I could replay any Spider-Man game over and over again besides Spider-Man PS4, I must say I would definitely replay the Spider-Man 2000 game. Now, I'm not going to go into detail on it too much because the video is on my channel. It was the first video I uploaded in the countdown. I did it on purpose because it was one of the first Spider-Man games I ever owned. So, yeah, I think that's enough for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. Drop me a like if you enjoyed it. If you're new to the channel, drop me a subscribe. I would really appreciate that. Also, if you've already subscribed to the channel, be sure to hit the notifications banner so you don't miss any of my content. As soon as I get Spider-Man, I guarantee you I will be live streaming it. There will be many, many shenanigans going on in that game. So, that being said, this has been Gamer Dude. Happy gaming, and I shall catch you all real soon.